If you remember a few weeks ago, we talked about the question of, am I doing the service of God out of an attitude of obligation? Do I just feel like I have to do it? Or am I doing it because I really love the Lord, because I want to do His service? Along those lines, we're going to be looking at the question of, am I doing it because it is good? Because I know this is a righteous deed, or am I doing this because it makes me look good when I do it? Do I get a lot of compliments when I do these things? Is it for others or is it for God? Let's go ahead and open our Bibles to Matthew chapter 6 because that's going to be our core passage for today. It says in verse 1, Jesus starts by saying, "Take heed that you do not do your righteousness before men to be seen by them." There has always been a problem with people doing good things for the wrong reason. Not to help others, not to honor God, but to make themselves look good. Jesus called it out in the Pharisees 2,000 years ago. It had happened, of course, well before that, and it continues to be man's motivation when it comes to doing things ever since. Sometimes we like to use good works more as a mirror to admire ourselves instead of as a way for others to truly see God. While this problem has certainly always existed and we can see it throughout history, it feels like our current culture has put it on steroids. Because of things like social media, people thrive on self-glorification almost like never before. People of all ages are desperately trying to get into the spotlight, whether it's through YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, or even Facebook. You've probably even seen people making videos like this. Just imagine for a second there's a man who's clearly homeless or clearly in need on the side of the road. And then somebody comes over with this giant, huge $10,000 check that everyone can see. And they go over and give it to this homeless man, or they'll give them a briefcase full of money. But when they do it, they make sure they have multiple camera angles, they have all the best mic and audio quality, make sure they posted it beforehand, and maybe even live stream it so people can see their good deeds live. Now, the strangers in these situations do oftentimes either get a meal or a few dollars, but really the one who's getting the reward is the one who's doing the giving in this case, because they know that they're going to get likes, comments, and praise from thousands of strangers online. And this may look generous, and there are cases where it is genuinely out of good, but for the most part, it is for the selfish gain of the one doing it. It's not a light pointing people to God, it's a spotlight pointed right back at the giver. That now the video that I just mentioned is more on the extreme side of that, but we do that in our everyday lives. I'm going to mention a few examples. I'm not going to say names because that would defeat the whole point. But there was a lady back when I worked in Chick-fil-A who was told to go rearrange this. We had this area with all the boxes, all the condiments, basically the break room, whatever. They were told to go arrange it. And when she was told, she acted all happy. But if any employee that wasn't a manager walked in there, you would see the lady sitting around because she thought there was no use in doing it if she didn't get the manager's attention. And when she finally completed it, you could not go one day without talking to her and hearing about how good of a job she did in the break room. Now, did she do the job? Yes. But in her mind, what was the point in doing that job? To be recognized, to get the attention for the good job that she's doing. When I was younger, we were always told to clean our room even if we didn't make the mess, and man, did that make me mad. But one day I decided, okay, I didn't make this mess, but I'm going to clean it. And I did. But it was like, I don't know, it was bursting out that I just wanted to tell everybody, Mom, look, I did this without you even asking. Aren't you proud? Didn't I do a good job? You get the point. We do it all the time, whether it's not as obvious as what I'm saying or it is. People do things for attention, and it's the same with good deeds. But now, on the other hand, Jesus tells us that we're not supposed to hide our righteousness, but instead in Matthew chapter 5, verses 14 and 15, he says, "You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and hide it under a basket, but put it on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Then in verse 16, he goes on to say, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. We are commanded to let our light shine before others. So then why are we told not to? There's a key difference in the two in Matthew 5 and Matthew 6, and it is the reason that we're shining that light. Jesus says when we do it, it should be that the Father is getting the glory, not because we want to be recognized and we want to be complimented. Paul talked about this when he spoke of his willingness to die for Christ in Philippians chapter 1 and verse 20. He said that it was his aim that Christ would be exalted in his body, whether it was by life or by death. It wasn't about Paul or Paul's personal image. He wanted it all to be pointed towards Christ. So then, if in Matthew 5 we're told to shine our lights, in Matthew 6, we're told not to do righteous deeds before others, what is the difference? It depends on the motivation behind our actions. The same action can be an act of worship and praise to God or an act of total self-promotion, depending on the heart we have when we're doing it. There are so many people, even in the church today, that are doing things more for their own glory than for the glory of God. But when that is at our hearts, even if what we're doing is a good deed and people benefit from it, it is done in vain and there is no eternal reward for us. When we have selfish motives behind our good deeds, Jesus says in Matthew 6 and verse 1, you have no reward with your Father who is in heaven. It doesn't matter how impressive the action looks, or even how much good it seems to us that we did in the moment. If it's all about you, God doesn't want it, and there will be nothing left for us. The Pharisees did many things that were considered righteous. Let's look at a few verses here in Matthew chapter 6. Verse 2, it says, therefore, when you do a charitable deed, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets. Now let's go down to verse 5. And when you pray, you shall not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the corners of the streets. And then again, verse 16, moreover, then when you fast, do not be like the hypocrites with a sad countenance. So when it mentions these things, I'm only hearing good things. Doing charitable deeds, fasting, praying. Is there anything wrong with the deeds that they're doing themselves? No. But they're called hypocrites because they're doing it for the wrong reason. John chapter 12, John 12, 42 and 43. Nevertheless, even among the rulers, many believed in him, but because of the Pharisees, they did not confess him, lest they be put out of the synagogue. For they loved the praise of men more than the praise of God. Matthew 23, 5 through 7. But all their works they do to be seen by men. They make their phylacteries broad and enlarge the borders of their garments, which their phylacteries is the priestly garments, which would have had jewels and gold. They make that as big as possible for people to notice, I'm important. Look at my position. Then back to the text. They love the best places at the feast and the best seats in the synagogues, greetings in the marketplace, and to be called by men, Rabbi, Rabbi. They wanted to be seen as important, more important than others. They wanted men to praise them for their work and to think that they were doing more work than others. This is describing someone who likes the status that righteousness brought. But praise, status, and power from men are all temporary. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 24. All flesh is as grass, and all the glory of man as the flower of the grass. The grass withers, and its flower falls away, but the word of the Lord endures forever. Just as mankind fades like grass, so do all the things that go along with them, including their praise. But I have good news. If your heart is set on getting glory from men, you can get it. Let's look at the verse that we just looked at in chapter 6, verse 2. The end of the verse says, that they may have glory from men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. The end of verse 5. Again, that they may be seen by men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. One more time in verse 16. That they may appear to men to be fasting. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward in full. The phrase, they have their reward in full, means that they've already gotten all they're going to get from the Lord, and that is the praise from men that lasted only a moment. There is nothing in eternity waiting for them because they weren't doing it for God. They weren't doing it for eternity. They were doing it to feel good. When we choose self-glorification over the glory of God, we're trading that same eternal treasure that the Pharisees and the scribes traded for temporary applause. So we need to strive in what we do to have the right heart. The wrong heart obviously seeks recognition for itself, so logically, and what Jesus tells us, is the right heart seeks it only from God. Look back in our text, Matthew 6, beginning in verse 3. But when you do a charitable deed, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, that your charitable deed may be done in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will himself reward you openly. Now, the point here isn't to be secretive just to be secretive. It's about humility, about removing me from the center and putting God there instead. When our good works are done quietly, without constantly sounding the alarm bells, telling everyone what we're doing, we're showing that we care more about God's approval than man's approval because he's the only one that sees us in those moments. Galatians chapter 10 and verse 1 says, Galatians 10:1, for do I now persuade men or God? Or do I seek to please men? For if I still pleased men, I would not be a bondservant of Christ. His goal was not to win human approval. He says even that if he was trying to win human approval, he wouldn't be able to be a bondservant of God. The only thing he wanted was to faithfully serve the master. And when we have this right heart that Paul so willingly illustrates over and over, we're not discouraged when people don't notice our work. We're not deflated when we don't get a thank you or a public mention. I can remember when I first started preaching, I kind of got into this mindset again that I had when I was young. I was doing so many different little things that I thought were so important that everyone should see, everyone should be doing, but then I wouldn't get a thank you sometimes. And when I didn't, I'm like, why am I even doing this? What's the point? But right there, you see the attitude. Who was I doing it for? I mean, I thought I was doing it for God, but I was only doing it so people would recognize it. I was hurt if I wasn't mentioned in the Sunday evening announcement. So thank you, Will, for whatever you did. But when our confidence is based in the Lord, and based in the knowledge that he sees and knows what we're doing. And he has promised in Hebrews chapter 6 and verse 10, he says, for God is not unjust to forget your work and labor of love which you have shown toward his name, in that you have ministered to the saints and do minister. We can know that he always sees and always remembers what we have done. And this perspective frees us from the trap of comparison or the mindset of competing with others because we stop measuring ourselves by the reactions of others and start measuring ourselves by one important question. Does this glorify God? The right heart doesn't just avoid man's praise. It actively treasures the reward that God brings. Matthew 6 and verse 6. But you, when you pray, go into your room, and when you have shut your door, pray to your Father who is in the secret place, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. Now, the reward that is talked about so many times is not always going to be a physical reward, but we can know and have peace and joy that we have done something that will be accounted to us in eternity. And it says that every secret deed, whether good or evil, will be revealed in the day of judgment. God is always watching, and he always cares. Moses is a really good example of the kind of things we're talking about. In Hebrews chapter 11, 24 and 26, it says, by faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater than the riches and or than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward. He had the opportunity to be highly esteemed in that he was raised in the house of Pharaoh. He could have lived in a palace, enjoyed status, enjoyed all the treasures of the richest nation in the world at the time, but he chose to suffer in an unbecoming way as someone the Egyptians hated, all for the eternal reward, because he knew it was so much better than any of these things that we think are so important on earth. Man's glory was nothing to him. The right heart always values God's well done over the world's well liked. So we have to work to remove our selfish motives in service. Because selfishness does not have to define the way that we live or serve. God calls us to something higher, something greater, righteousness that comes from a pure heart and a desire to glorify Him and only Him. And it requires that we move all the me-centeredness out of our lives. And we need to start by asking questions like I've already mentioned, such as, who is this for? For me or for God? And in trying to find the answer of what our motivations are, we're told in the scriptures that we need to turn to God for help. Psalm 139, verses 23 through 24 says, search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxieties, and see if there's any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. I've already briefly mentioned this, but the danger is that we can fool ourselves into thinking we're serving God, when in reality we're just serving our own egos. God tells us that in Jeremiah chapter 17, verses 9 and 10, he says, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? And then he says in verse 10, as the answer to that, I, the Lord, can know the heart and test the mind. This is why it is essential for us not only to examine ourselves, but to turn to the Word, to turn to prayer, to help us see if there's any ill motive within us. Galatians chapter 6, Galatians 6, verses 3 and 4. For if anyone thinks himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But let each one examine his own work, and then he will have rejoicing in himself alone, and not in another. Before we post it, before we start texting or announcing it to everyone, before we even do it, we have to honestly ask about that question, is my aim to glorify God or me? And if we discover that it is our motives are wrong, then it's not the time to give up. It's not the time to just do nothing. It's the time to repent and realign our motives with God so that we can do those things in the way that He takes pleasure in. Jesus gives us the safeguard that we need to or to fight against pride that comes with all of this. And it's what we already mentioned in Matthew 6, 3 and 4 of practicing doing things in secret. Serving in secret teaches us to be content only in God's eyes. When no one sees us, when no one thanks us or even gives us credit, and yet we continue to serve, that's when we know that our heart is truly in the right place, set on pleasing the Lord, because He is the only one knowing that happens. And this can take many forms. I've just written a couple up here on the board that you can look at, but there are many different ways that we can set our minds to serving in secret. Now, I'm not going to mention names again because she'd kill me, but there's a lady here who does so many things in secret, I couldn't even recount them all. Even this morning, when I got here to help set up the new stuff, she was already here working and she wasn't announcing it. She wasn't doing it to brag, just simply she saw what needed to get done and she did it. And now we're all here in a nice, clean building, well temperatured, getting to enjoy a study of the Word. But it's when we do things like that, without asking or wanting recognition, that God takes joy in our work. When someone does praise our actions, however, we need to work on learning to redirect that praise to God, even with the best motives and no intent of bringing attention to yourselves. If you're following Christ, it's inevitable that someone is going to see you doing something good. What do you do when that happens? Well, it's up to us then to work on humbly responding and pointing the glory back to God where it belongs. And it's not a false sense of humility, it's truly just giving credit where credit is due. James writes to us in James chapter 1 and verse 17, every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. Every good gift came from God. Every good work comes from God, Ephesians 2 and verse 10. And so in giving the glory to God, we're not robbing ourselves of anything. We're turning it to where it originated from. Paul again illustrates the same thing in 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 10 when he says, but by the grace of God I am what I am, and his grace towards me was not in vain, but I labored more abundantly than they all. Yet not I, but the grace of God which was with me. Now, he didn't try to deny the work which he had done. In fact, we're going to see that he writes about some of the things that he suffered, some of the things that he did for the God. But every time he does, he makes sure that the glory went to God's grace and not to his own strength. I mean, right here, it wasn't me, but the grace of God which was in me. Redirecting praise to God not only protects our hearts from pride, but it also becomes an excellent witness to those around us. When people see humility paired with excellent work, they're drawn to the source of that humility, which then gives us an opportunity to say, I'm doing this for Jesus Christ, or to God be the glory. So at the end of our lives, the praise of men will count for nothing. Applause is going to fade. All of the things we have now will eventually be forgotten, but what is done for God from a true heart will stand forever. Jesus showed us the way in John 7 and verse 18 when he says, he who seeks the glory of the one who sent him is true. If the Son of God lived to honor the Father, why should we not do the same? So I encourage us all to really strive to be honest with ourselves. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Who am I doing this for? And let us learn to serve in secret. And when the spotlight does come on us, when people see things we're doing, let's make sure that we're redirecting the praise to where it belongs, and that is on God the Father. One day, the only words that will actually matter are at the end of our lives when God either says or does not say, well done, good and faithful servant. So as we go throughout this week, we're going to assuredly be presented with opportunities to do good things. Let's make sure we're doing them for God and not for ourselves.